In the US, deaths from alcohol, drugs, and suicide finally moved in the right direction. Pakistan's solar boom is happening so fast that experts are calling it one of the fastest people-powered solar rollouts in the world. And one of Africa's smallest countries just created its first marine reserve with the help of a man who once poached turtles. This is Yash, and here are 7 good news stories from around the world that you probably didn't hear enough about this week. Okay, this is the kind of news where you don't exactly celebrate, you just pause for a second and go, finally. Because in the US, deaths from alcohol, drugs, and suicide actually moved in the right direction, and that's a very big deal. For years, the United States had been dealing with a brutal crisis. People dying from overdoses, alcohol-related causes, and suicide. And these are not just numbers. These are parents, friends, neighbors, people who should still be here. But in 2024, something important happened. New research from Trust for America's Health found that alcohol-related deaths fell by 4%, drug overdose deaths fell by 26%, and suicide deaths fell by 3%. The biggest drop was in overdose deaths. And honestly, after years of seeing that crisis get worse and worse, this matters. Experts think the decline may have been linked to better access to treatment, overdose prevention work, early intervention, harm reduction, and mental health support. Basically, when help is actually available, it can save lives. Now, this is not, we fixed it, everyone go home kind of a story. Suicide deaths are still way too high in some communities, especially among American Indians and Alaskan natives. And public health experts are warning that if funding gets cut, this progress could slow down or even reverse. But still, this is real progress. And in a crisis that has felt hopeless for a lot of people, seeing the curve finally bend the other way is huge. Sometimes, good news is not loud. Sometimes, it's just fewer families getting the worst phone call of their lives. And that is worth paying attention to. A law cannot undo the harm that has already happened. But sometimes, a law can draw a line and say, no more. And that is exactly what Colombia is trying to do. Colombia's Congress has passed a historic bill to ban female genital mutilation, also known as FGM. And this is a big deal because Colombia is believed to be the only country in Latin America where the practice is still documented. It mainly affects parts of the indigenous Embera community. Now, FGM is not some cultural debate where everyone shrugs and moves on. It can cause severe pain, infections, childbirth complications, trauma, and long-term psychological harm. It is widely recognized as a serious human rights violation. The new bill is called the Girls Without Mutilation Law, and it is now waiting for presidential approval. But the important part is, the law is not only about punishment. Because let's be real, if something is happening in remote areas, often in secret, you cannot just write a law and magically expect everything to change. So the bill focuses on prevention, education, working with communities, better reporting systems, and building a national policy to actually help end the practice. That matters, because real change needs trust. It needs local leadership. It needs people inside communities saying, we can protect girls and still protect who we are. And this is part of a bigger global shift too. The World Health Organization says progress against FGM has accelerated in the last decade, with the share of girls being subjected to it falling in countries where it still persists. So Colombia's bill is not just a piece of paper. It's one more country saying girls deserve safety, dignity, and control over their own bodies. And honestly, that should not be controversial. What if one annoying traffic rule actually kept people out of the hospital? Because that's what seems to be happening in London. London has something called the Ultra Low Emission Zone, or ULEZ. And yes, it is one of those policies that makes some drivers extremely angry on the internet. But the idea is simple. If your vehicle is very polluting, you pay to drive in certain parts of the city. The goal is cleaner air. And now new research from Imperial College London suggests it may also be saving people from serious health complications. In central London, they found the policies are associated with an 8.1% reduction in yearly trends for cardiovascular disease admissions, a 6.2% reduction for respiratory disease admissions, and a 3.1% reduction in all-cause hospital admissions. Cleaner air may mean fewer people ending up in hospital with breathing problems, heart problems, and pollution-related diseases. And that is massive because air pollution is not just bad for the environment. It is bad for your lungs, your heart, your kid with asthma, your grandparent walking to the shop, the person waiting at the bus stop every morning, basically anyone who breathes. Now, researchers were careful, cities are complicated, and one study cannot explain every single thing. But this does support a very hopeful idea. Clean air policies can have real health benefits. And the best part is, this is not some futuristic sci-fi solution. It is just a city using rules, transport policy, and public health thinking to make everyday air less terrible, which honestly more cities should be looking at. Be honest. Had you heard of Sao Tome and Principe before this video? Because one of Africa's smallest countries just did something pretty amazing for the ocean. And the story involves a former turtle poacher helping protect marine life. Sao Tome and Principe is a small island nation in the Gulf of Guinea, and it has now officially recognized its first 2 marine protected areas. The new protected zones cover more than 60 square kilometers of ocean around Santana and Ilhéu das Rolas. And the goal is very simple: give the ocean a chance to recover. Industrial and destructive fishing will be restricted, while sustainable traditional fishing will be allowed in some areas. That balance is important because this is not about telling local communities, cool, you're banned from the sea now. It's about protecting fish populations so people can still depend on the ocean in the future. And one of the most interesting people behind the story is Manuel Gomes, also known as Lindo. He grew up fishing and was once involved in turtle poaching. But after learning more about conservation, he completely changed direction. Now he helps protect sea turtles and marine life. He has worked with local communities, helped collect biodiversity data, and has supported the creation of these protected areas. He has a proper character arc. The reserves are expected to help sharks, rays, sea turtles, fish, mollusks, and shellfish. And 6 more marine protected areas are expected to be designated later. So the good news here is not just a map got updated, it is that local people, conservationists, and the government work together to protect the sea in a way that also protects livelihood. And honestly, that is what ocean conservation has to look like if it has to last. Pakistan's solar boom is wild because it did not start like some giant government master plan. It started with people looking at electricity bills and blackouts and basically saying, fine, we'll do it ourselves. Pakistan is becoming one of the most surprising solar stories in the world. The country has imported massive amounts of solar panels from China in recent years. Energy experts estimate Pakistan imported around 7.6 gigawatts of solar panels in 2023, 16.4 gigawatts in 2024, and about 16.9 gigawatts in 2025. This is huge because the really interesting part is how this is happening. This is not mainly one giant rooftop national scheme. It is not some perfectly organized government campaign with inspirational posters and a theme song. A lot of it is bottom up. Families, farmers, shop owners, factories, and businesses are installing solar panels because electricity is expensive, power cuts are frustrating, and solar has become cheap enough to actually make sense. One energy professor described it as a solar boom that had happened largely in spite of the state, not because of it, which is a polite academic way of saying people got tired of waiting. Now, obviously, this is not perfect. Some installations may have safety issues, poorer households may still be left out, and the national grid has to figure out how to handle such a fast shift. But a bigger message is incredible. Solar has become cheap enough and useful enough that ordinary people can push an energy transition forward themselves. That is not just a Pakistan story. That is a preview of what could happen in a lot of countries. Because when clean energy becomes the practical choice, people do not need to be begged to adopt it. They just do. Here's something you do not hear every day. A regulation worked exactly like it was supposed to. I know, shocking, right? Everyone stay calm. California and New York introduced rules to phase out PFAS chemicals from many textile products. PFAS are often called forever chemicals because they do not break down easily in the environment. They have been used in things like raincoats, yoga pants, furniture, children's products, and outdoor gear to make them resistant to water, oil, and stains. Which sounds useful until you get to the part where many PFAS chemicals have been linked to serious health and environmental concerns. For years, some companies argued that removing them would be too hard. And then the laws came in. And suddenly, would you look at that? Change happened. Testing by the Natural Resources Defense Council found a dramatic drop in PFAS levels in clothing and textile products sold in California and New York. In some cases, levels fell from thousands of parts per million to less than 10 parts per million. Major outdoor brands reduced PFAS levels in raincoats between 97% and 99.99%. That is not a tiny tweak, that is a market shift. Now, the job is not finished. Some products still showed concerning levels and supply chains are messy, so contamination can still happen. But the big lesson is pretty clear. When governments set strong rules, companies can often change much faster than they claim. And because big brands do not want totally separate supply chains for every state, laws in a few places can end up improving products for people everywhere. So yes, smart regulation can be boring, but sometimes boring is what quietly makes daily life safer. Okay, I can already hear some people typing, but before the comment section starts doing parkour, listen to this. A new study suggests updated COVID vaccines may help protect the heart. COVID vaccines are usually talked about as protection against infection or severe illness, but a new study looked at something else: cardiovascular problems. Researchers studied more than 1 million US veterans who used the Department of Veterans Affairs health system during the 2024-2025 vaccination season. They compared people who got both the updated COVID vaccine and the flu vaccine with people who only got the flu vaccine. And the results were important. The updated COVID vaccine was associated with a lower risk of COVID-related major cardiovascular events. That includes things like cardiovascular death, heart attack, stroke, and hospitalization for heart failure. Overall, the vaccine group had about a 37.7% lower risk of these COVID-associated major cardiovascular events. The study also found lower risk of COVID-associated cardiovascular death, heart attack, and heart failure hospitalization. The stroke result pointed in the right direction too, although researchers were less certain about that specific finding. And the biggest benefit was seen in people over 75 and people with existing health conditions. Which makes sense. COVID can put stress on the heart, blood vessel, lungs, immune system, especially if someone is already vulnerable. Now, important caveat. The study was mostly in older male veterans, so researchers need to keep studying wider groups of people. So no, this is not one study ends every argument forever. Science does not work like that, even though the internet desperately wants it to. But the good news is still clear. Vaccination may not only reduce the risk of severe COVID, it may also reduce some of the serious heart-related complications that can follow infection. And for high-risk people, that kind of protection really matters. And these were some of the good news stories from around the world. We'll be back next week with your weekly dose of good news. For staying with us till the end, here's a cute picture for you.